if you really want a relationship to be nourishing and happy and compassionate, you gotta really work on letting go of your attachments, because when you lessen the attachments, you're increasing not only your freedom, but your partner's potential for freedom.
Welcome to The One You Feed.
What if the biggest thing getting in the way of love is the way we hold on to it? That was one of the biggest insights I took from this conversation with Diego Perez, better known as Young Pueblo. He said something that really stuck with me. Attachment is just a deep form of inflexibility. It can look like love, but it's often about control. And that really hit me. It reminded me of something my partner Ginny has said, which is that when we fixate on one specific thing, like a cupcake, nothing else will satisfy us. But when we step back and recognize what we actually need underneath it, so many possibilities open up. That's flexibility. And in this episode, Diego shares how meditation reshaped his relationships, why growth, kindness, and compassion are green flags in relationships, and how we can advocate for our needs without clinging too tightly to our stories. This was such a warm and insightful conversation, and I know you'll take something valuable from it. I'm Eric Zimmer, and this is The One You Feed. Hi, Diego. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you back on. This time around, we're going to be discussing your book, How to Love Better, The Path to Deeper Connection Through Growth, Kindness, and Compassion. And so we'll get to that in a minute, but let's start like we always do, with a parable. In the parable, there's a grandparent who's talking with their grandchild, and they say in life, there's two wolves inside of us that are always at battle. One is a good wolf, which represents things like kindness and bravery and love. And the other is a bad wolf, which represents things like greed and hatred and fear. And the grandchild stops, they think about it for a second. They look up at their grandparent and they say, well, which one wins? And the grandparent says, the one you feed. So I'd like to start off by asking you what that parable means to you in your life and in the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, that parable is really just so powerful, and it's nice, hearing it once again and reflecting on it. And immediately it made me think back to how the wolf that I was afraid of was fear itself, like the fear to feel my own emotions. And I think what it really means is like embracing the good wolf, embracing like the good qualities of life, is really just having the resilience to feel, the simplicity of that, and how that's, turned my life in a much better direction.
The thing that comes through in this book very clear is your meditation practice. It's really emphasized. I think you say in the book you've been at it for about 12 years and that you have something like 12,000 hours of practice, which that's a lot of diligence, right? I assume some of that gets stacked up in, longer silent retreats, but that's still a lot of, that's a very dedicated and focused practice. As someone who's been a long-time meditator myself, I do find that the motivation wanes from time to time. How does it stay high enough to keep that level of continuous practice up?
I guess I'm really motivated by the results, honestly. I think it's the best investment I've ever made. It's, better than investing in the S&P 500. It's just like such a strong, result-oriented practice where I see how when I go to retreats, I started making better decisions when I was back home. And then when I started meditating daily, my capacity and my creativity started expanding. And not only that on the individual level, but on the interpersonal level, like all my relationships started deepening. So there are definitely times where, it's more difficult than others to sit my, 2 hours a day, but I always get it done because I know that I'm just better off for it. And it's almost like, feeding myself daily. Like I have to feed myself, bathe myself, and at the same time, I also have to tend to my mind. So it feels pretty essential.
Have you had any time in there where you've sort of slipped a little bit and done less of it and then been like, oh boy, I can really tell the difference? Or are you still just sort of running off of I know this is really good for me, keep doing it kind of thing?
Yeah, honestly, it would take a lot to make me not do it, and but I haven't. I've been doing it now for like I started meditating in 2012, and I started going to retreats, but then I started meditating daily in the beginning of 2015, and it's been ongoing now for what is that? Like almost 10
9 years,
years in
yeah.
the summer, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it would just like, I'd have to be like really sick or something like that, or in a coma, or if I had a child and they like needed me,
Yeah,
24/7 or something like that. But because right now I have that luxury of, not having kids and being healthy, it gets the priority it needs.
got it. All right, let's move into the book itself about
Hmm.
how to love better. And we're going to explore some of the big ideas in the book, but I want to start with you talk about something called green flags in relationships. I think we've heard we've heard the term red flag in a relationship, but 3 green flags that you talk about are growth, kindness, and compassion. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about why you chose those and why they're important for relationships.
Yeah, I think, they felt really critical, especially the growth one where you get into a relationship and as soon as you're in there, you start seeing very clearly what you're good at and what you're not good at. That you can see if you lack the skill of listening well or if you lack patience and whatnot. And I think embracing your own growth and understanding that it's really a lifelong journey, whether you're in partnership or not, that's going to help you just show up as the best version of yourself. And I think a lot of times people want to be in a relationship with someone who has their stuff figured out, but the reality is that like everyone comes into a relationship quite imperfect. And instead of wanting someone to like, have all the emotional skill set and all of that figured out, instead what you're really looking for is that they embrace growth, that they see and then can hold themselves accountable and then can step up and repair what they need to repair. The other element, one of kindness, is that when you're in proximity to someone, whomever you're in proximity to, whether it's a roommate, whether it's a family member, whether it's someone you're, in an intimate relationship with, the person that you're closest to is going to see the best of you and the worst of you. So being intentional about, having the vulnerability to let someone see you in your down moments, but also still, doing your best to be sweet with them, to give them your kindness, to treat them gently, because that kindness that you can receive from another person, it helps you move through the ups and downs of life.
Mhm.
And then the last element of compassion, I'm speaking about a very specific form of compassion where you are doing your best to step outside of your perspective to see the perspective of another person, because this is the fundamental skill set that you need to be able to solve arguments when they arise.
Okay, so I was going to ask about the difference between compassion and kindness. So in this case, kindness is sort of all the gestures and the general orientation towards a person in your
Right. The
general
care.
interactions.
Yeah, the care, the gentleness. Yeah.
And compassion is the ability to say, hang on, I don't necessarily agree with what they're saying, but I'm going to pause and I'm going to perhaps, elevate myself a little bit and try and see what their side of it before I have a reaction.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. I think it's it's an element of humility where you understand that, okay, I may be having my own set of experiences, but my perception is not perfect. I don't know exactly what's going on. I may know for myself, but let me take a moment to really listen to my partner and hear how things are moving for them.
Humility is a word that you use a lot in this book, and
Hmm.
it is not a word that shows up a lot of places very often. Now, I got sober in a 12-step program, and one of the steps has the word humility or humble in it, and
Mm.
the AA Big Book talks about humility a fair amount. but I don't see it very often. Why is that a word that resonates with you? And maybe before you tell us why it resonates with you, tell us what it means to you.
It's funny. I'm glad that you're like catching on that too, because I find that it's not a very popular word. Like if
No,
you try to write a post and you're sort of building that post around the word humility, like it is just going to flop. And
even for
that,
your audience.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's why, like, a lot of the stuff that you'll see on my Instagram account, it's to pique your interest and to hopefully so that you can, we can develop a sense of trust so that you then give me your patience to then hear about subjects like humility and how
yeah.
important they are. I mean, to me, humility is the simple art of fully understanding that I don't know everything and I have a lot to learn.
Hmm.
And that my perspectives and whatnot, what my views, they're not complete, they're not perfect, and that it's worth learning and communicating with others to be able to expand what I know.
That's a great definition.
It feels like, not only is that like critical in your own growth journey, but in your relationship, I think coming into it, like I think about it as if there's another green flag, it's, when you are really getting to know somebody, you see that, they don't act like they know everything, that they ask questions, that they're like
Hmm.
curious about, tell me more. Like, tell me more is one of my favorite sentences.
Yep. Yeah. The definition that I had heard for a while is slightly different. I think it's just it's a slightly different orientation of the same idea, which is that, it's about having a very accurate assessment of your good and bad qualities, right? It's
Mm,
not about knowing all about what's bad about you. It's not about, denying what's good about you. It's about having a relatively clear picture of, here's the type of person I am. But I really love that idea of it being just recognizing you don't know everything and being open. Like that is such a important skill. And it is, talk about like green flags. It is one of the things that attracts me to other people in any
mm,
way, shape, or form and
absolutely.
repels me from people who think they know everything. Like I'm allergic to it a little bit, like almost to the point that I need to like get over it a little bit. But it's one of my least favorite character traits.
I'm with you, and I think when I encounter people who have that humility to learn more from others, to me, it's an immediate sign of intelligence and that they have the sort of like mental capacity and framework for higher intelligence to be able to like keep building on complexity because any views that any human is going to develop, they're just going to be very tilted, tainted, imperfect. Like we can only see so far. That's why we need each other.
Yeah. So let's move into one of the first key ideas in the book to me, which is that our own personal growth is really foundational to a good relationship.
Yeah, it's to me it was quite shocking that I went into meditating for my own personal development, for my own healing, and I started receiving the results of that pretty quickly. I started seeing that my mind felt lighter. I started seeing that self awareness started developing. But it was a surprise, a good surprise to see that it was immediately affecting my relationships in a very positive way. Started deepening my relationship with my parents, my relationship with my wife, who was then my girlfriend, started getting deeper, even relationships with friends. And it started really dawning on me how my relationship was just showing me so much of where I needed to grow. And if I refused to grow in these areas like listening better, having more patience, pausing, slowing down my reactions to just, give myself time to think. If I didn't accept that challenge to grow, then the relationship was just going to keep staying hard and probably getting harder. So there was no really, in my mind, there's no other alternative than to understand, like whether you meditate or not, like, there's a lot of room for growth in a relationship for every individual.
Well, you could just focus all your energy on getting the other person to grow and change. Does that work?
No, not at all. And I know
That
from
seems to be
experience.
the standard approach. That's often the standard approach.
Yeah, the first 6 years of my relationship with my wife, it was just like a giant blame game. It was just like, how can I make this tension in my mind your fault?
Yeah.
And we never won. Neither of us won.
No, yeah, no. It's funny to me, and I laugh from having been in this exact situation at times where I'm sitting there learning something new about growth and thinking in my mind, like, who really needs to hear this?
Oh, I know. And the answer is me. It's like, it's you, the person who's looking in the mirror.
You make an interesting point, though, about how growth from both people is sort of important, and I've seen this happen a lot. My peers are older than yours, but I've seen this happen a lot with people, somewhere near my age. The kids are finally up and out of the house, and one of the partners just really embarks on like growth and change and wanting to be a different person in a lot of ways, and the other person just says, I'm just gonna stay right here."
Yeah,
and that becomes really problematic and really painful for everybody involved, because on one hand, you can't fault the person who's like, "But we've been in this marriage all these years and you were this way and now you're different and you're expecting me to come along like all of a sudden."
Right.
And yet you can't fault somebody either for being like, "But hang on, I want to change, I want to grow." And I think we can talk about this a little bit more later in the conversation, but I think some of figuring out, is this workable? Am I okay with this? In those situations where it's a little more nebulous, right? Like nobody's done anything wrong.
Right, exactly.
Both people in the relationship are kind and good people.
Yeah.
And figuring that out is really difficult.
Yeah, and I think, it's funny because that even comes back to humility in a certain degree, where you have to learn to be okay with people growing in their own way.
Yes.
and also growing at their own speed.
Yes.
Like, we're not going to grow at this, like, we have such different conditioning. Some people have experienced immense amounts of traumas, others less so. And so that means, like, when you're trying to grow, like, different qualities will be, developing some qualities might be super, super difficult, like someone developing patience when all they've known for years is survival. And they're just like, trying to dodge things so that they can not be hurt. So I think understanding that, one, we don't have to change the same way, we don't have to change at the same speed, and that growth for you may look super different for me.
Yeah.
Like, if someone is really adamant about, I don't know, like meditating or going to therapy or just doing whatever it is, and maybe another person just needs to accept. They just need to accept themselves as they are, and that can be one of the biggest growth moments for them in their life, because they've been striving, and trying to be a very productive member of society or whatnot, and to just be able to accept yourself as you are could open up a world of peace inside of you. And I've seen it work in a lot of different ways, with couples of, of all ages, where one person is really interested in and takes care of themselves by hiking and being in nature, doing art. Other people by, going and, who really enjoy therapy, really enjoy meditating. I think people just have different tools that connect with them well.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've realized as my partner and I have been together longer, and I think we're in essentially our 10th year, is I think in the beginning, in a lot, try that again without hitting the mic. In the beginning, in a lot of relationships, I think there's a certain amount of, you sort of move towards each other because you're trying to connect, and then over time, if things are good, and you talk about, this is another theme we're going to get to, right? This ability to sort of have freedom to grow and change and move in a relationship. And so with my partner and I, Ginny, I've noticed that we have grown apart in some areas. And I don't mean apart as a couple. I mean, like, I like this and she likes that.
Yeah.
And I have this and she likes that. In the beginning, we might have both been a little bit more like meeting on that. And now there's a little bit more like just letting the other person be like, oh, I like this. And me making sure that I like this only means I like this, not you should like this.
Right.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
Thinking that the choices that I make are somehow more, conducive to a good life or whatever. And realizing like that's preposterous. Like, no, it's not. It's really preference and who we are as people, and allowing that to sort of be, more so. Like that's something I continue to learn.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Eric, because that really, to me, it's a sign of very healthy love. Because from my perspective, you're not only getting the safety of commitment, right? Clear commitment towards each other, but because that is so firm and established, you have the freedom to explore your interests, to like just go and, see what's out there in the world and still be able to come back home and have that, the nourishment of your partnership there. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of people get scared by the word freedom because you immediately think, oh, they're going to start sleeping with other people and dating other people. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the freedom to like let your preferences change, to let like even something as simple as like what you like to watch on TV and for it to like become something different, or what you like to read for it to, evolve and change over time. And even the way that you like to show up for people. And I think that's one of the beauties is like if you're really feeling nourished by your relationship, you will have that element of freedom to be able to continue evolving. And just because you don't have the same tastes doesn't mean you're going to stop loving each other. I think it was one of the hardest journeys, something as simple because in our relationship, Sarah and I, we like had this long series of years where we really enjoyed moving lockstep with each other, just like, we're eating the same foods, doing the same exercises, like, just like existing as similarly as possible. And that felt right for the time. But then we started learning that, oh, actually, the diet that she needs needs to be drastically different from my own.
Yeah.
And the exercise that she needs is also not the same. And now, like, we have learned the peculiarities that we need for the both of us to optimize and feel like our best version of ourselves. And it's not the same. And I think honestly, it was hard to accept in the beginning, but then we realized, oh, this is actually like us actively caring for each other, is giving each other that freedom.
Yep. I think it's one of the relationship skills. Like I said, I keep kind of learning that is, my preferences are just mine.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that a little bit. We've kind of hit on a few of the different points, but I want to talk about sort of between freedom and connection.
Mm-hmm.
So, you differentiate between love and what we would call attachment-based behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So first, let's lay out kind of what we mean by that, because I don't think we can have the right balance between freedom and connection if attachment is the thing that's running the show.
Totally. And just to clarify to whomever's listening too, we're talking about not the Western psychology style of attachment that is quite popular nowadays, but we're talking about the old school type of attachment that the Buddha put forward, where is one of the causes of misery. And by attachment in the book, I'm talking about the craving for things to exist in a very particular way, and that could mean like, having your partner like act in very specific ways, or having, all the things that you love always be there, and you being, clinging that for all the things that you really enjoy to always exist. And these sort of the rigidity of attachment, it'll first manifest in your mind as a certain mental image, this is what I want to happen. But the way it manifests through your actions is that it emerges as control. You're sort of like just really stiff about how you want things to exist. And if you really want a relationship to be nourishing and happy and compassionate, you gotta really work on letting go of your attachments, because when you lessen the attachments, you're increasing not only your freedom, but your partner's potential for freedom.
Before we dive back into the conversation, let me ask you something. What's one thing that has been holding you back lately? You know that it's there. You've tried to push past it, but somehow it keeps getting in the way. You're not alone in this, and I've identified 6 major saboteurs of self-control. Things like autopilot behavior, self-doubt, emotional escapism, that quietly derail our best intentions. But here's the good news. You can outsmart them. And I've put together a free guide to help you spot these hidden obstacles and give you simple, actionable strategies that you can use to regain control. Download the free guide now at oneyoufeed.net/ebook and take the first step towards getting back on track. I want to go back to what you said there about we're talking about attachment in a classic Buddhist sense, often translated as craving is another word for it. And then saying, we're not talking about Western attachment, but in a sense we are, I think. In that, if we talk about attachment styles, there's one style that, I never get my terms right, but it's basically securely attached. Right? That's the good one. And then there's, I think, avoidant and anxious attachment. Right. And then my favorite, which is the, you do both. You're completely confused, which is me. Like I just, okay, that didn't quite work. I'll try the other one. Wait, that's not working. I'll try, like bounce back and forth. Like I think they call it like, it's not a term confused. It's even better than that. Because I do think that those styles that we're describing are what happens when we don't have the secure attachment. And it's one thing to say I should not be like, I want to give my partner all the freedom in the world, right? But like you said, that's really hard to do if you don't have some sort of secure attachment. But then ironically, it's very hard to have a true secure attachment when you're interested in controlling your partner. Right. And so you end up in this a little bit of it can be this difficult game because you're wanting to control your partner because you're afraid they're going to move in a direction you don't want. And that very act of then controlling is causing them not to be securely attached to you.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think that type of, like, obviously those frameworks are really helpful to people, but I'm one who, I honestly have an aversion to all labels. Like, I feel like human beings are just they exist on such a wide spectrum that, like, one day I have secure attachments, another day I can have anxious attachments, and it's just like, you're just going to be changing all the time. So to me, it's like, how can I simplify my approach? And why not, instead of focusing on attachments and expectations, why not just fully vocalize how I like my happiness to be supported and see where we can make commitments to each other. Like if I can tell my wife, this is how I like my happiness to be supported. And she says, oh, I can do X, Y, and Z for you. And like, this feels good to me. This is like a way that I can try to show up for you. And from commitments can come a level of security that has nothing to do with, the coercion that sometimes happens from expectations or from attachments, where it's like you're demanding someone to really, exist in a particular way for you. And instead, you're just saying, like, these are my needs. This is how, these are my needs, and this is how they might relate to, like, my past traumas or how I've experienced life. And, from how these breakups and, these things that have happened that have really affected the way I show up now and how I'm currently working on them. But having things be clear and well-informed between the two of you just really sets you up for success because, expectations and attachments, like, you don't want things to be a mystery, and you don't want to set up traps for your partner. You want clarity for them.
Yep. I have a few thoughts there. I also am not a huge fan of labels. I think they serve a purpose for a certain period of time. I think they help us see patterns that we get stuck into where it's like, okay, you know what? Like, I don't want to say I am that, but you know what? I keep doing that. So there's a pattern there that's worth seeing, but they're only useful, I think, until they start limiting you. I think the question here around attachment is, this all sounds good I tell my partner the way I would like them to support my happiness, and they say yes, and then they support my happiness in that way, and everything's great. Except when it doesn't quite work that way, meaning like these sort of nuanced things you get into in relationship. And I'm just going to pull out two cliches, right? One is one partner wants more sexual attachment than the other, or more sexual contact than the other. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about here when people are like, there's genuinely like a connection. It's a connection point, right? Mm-hmm. The other would be somebody who says like, I'd like my partner to be more emotionally expressive, mm-hmm. right, than they are. And those things are there's often still a tension there, right? And I think it gets tricky, or at least I have found it tricky in my life to see, when am I calmly advocating and stating what I would like in a relationship? When am I having an expectation mm-hmm. and attachment mm-hmm. or craving to things being a certain way? And it gets in that nuanced area where, like, again, there's the perfect world where we say what we want, we get it all the time. There's the other world where we say what we want, we never get it. Those are pretty easy, right? Mm-hmm. But most of life happens in between those in relationships. So I'm curious how you think about, particularly that, like, I'm stating what I want and my partner isn't quite able to meet me there. Mm-hmm. It seems to keep coming up for me. How do I let that go? Or should I let it go? Or how do I, I just think that's something I've been in and I've seen others in that just gets tricky.
Oh, totally. And it gets very nuanced, and it's very situational to like the intrinsic qualities of your relationship, because everyone, especially when you're hearing different people's advice, like, does it really match to your situation and the current mm-hmm. conditions?
Yeah, exactly.
I think a lot of times, like, one, from my experience, like, the arguments have decreased in terms of their level of tension because we're less attached, but mm-hmm. often the arguments are the same. It's like we're still like, arguing about similar things over and over. And it's because we have deeply ingrained patterns, like I'm more of a people person. Sarah's more reserved. Like, I'm more forward. She's, a little less forward, and is just like more calmly exists within herself. And I think there are these aspects and, character types that we have to kind of work with. And what you end up finding is that you want to have a healthy balance of giving and receiving. And I think that's where, like, a lot of the tension gets resolved, where, like, if you feel like you're doing your part to care for your partner and you're doing your best to meet their needs and meet the way that they like to be supported, that doesn't mean you're going to get 100% all the time.
Yep.
Right? That just means that you're trying and you have some clarity around it. But then there are going to be some months that are way harder than others, and you're not going to be able to show up as well. But I think having the sense of, like, one, you're not always going to get what you want. Like, you're not like, that's not what a relationship is. It means like you're joining this journey, and this, like, it's on, and in some ways it's a joyful challenge, right? Like it's like, yes, like, they add so much beauty and harmony to your life and elevate your life, but it's going to have its own ups and downs, and you're just never expecting your partner to be perfect. You're just expecting them to show up for you and have a degree of accountability when they make mistakes, basically the simple accountability of apologizing and trying to change the behavior when something does go wrong. But I really think, like, you just can't expect things to always go your way. And if you do, then there's a problem there. There's something that you need to work on within yourself, because your partner is not like, they're a human being who also, is going to ebb and flow in their energy, and they're not always going to be able to give at the same rate. So we need to be mindful of that. Is there balance with our giving and receiving?
Yeah. I have been in some distinctly unjoyful challenges also. in the past. Uh, my current one is a joyful challenge. I've been in the unjoyful challenge. There's something you say, though, that I think that gets to the heart of this a little bit. And it is that you say attachment is a deep form of inflexibility.
Yeah.
And I really like that idea, because one of the things when I think when we're looking at a relationship as by talking about what we did earlier, right, sort of going up a level and looking at the thing as a whole, there are going to be places where perhaps I would like to be supported in that way there, but I'm not as much as I would. But these three other areas, boy, I'm really deeply supported over there.
Yeah.
And but when we become inflexible, which is like, no, it's got to be that way and this way. And you talk in the book about how it's good to recognize that, like, you ask your partner how they want to be cared for is good. And I think that's important. And we'll talk about that. There's also something to be said to being flexible enough in certain cases that you let your partner care for you in the way that they like to care. You know what I mean? Like, the way they naturally show care and support. But I just love that idea. I love the idea of flexibility in general. And I love the idea of thinking of attachment as a deep inflexibility.
Yeah. And this all really stems from, understanding how essential this law of impermanence is to the entirety of the universe. Like, literally, at the atomic level, the biological level, the cosmological level, like, everything is always changing. So what that's taught me is that I need to work with the universe and not against it. If everything is changing and flowing forward, what does that tell me? It means I need to embrace change. When change comes and I can't do anything about it, and my actions can't, resolve things or change things in a way that I would prefer, then I have no other opportunity but to accept.
Yeah.
And it feels like this inflexibility, you're basically trying to move against the river of the universe, where it's just flowing and changing and moving forward. So to me, it's, work with the universe, not against it.
You may know this, being, a poet in addition to the other things that you do, but I just had a conversation before this one with a mathematician, and we were talking about calculus, and he then referenced the poet Adrienne Rich, which I did not see coming out of a calculus conversation. But he talks about her poem, which the famous line in it is, "The moment of change is the only poem," which just made me, as you were talking about sort of that dynamic nature of everything, I just think that's such a beautiful line.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I haven't heard that one. That's just, it's literally like,
Yeah.
when I think about what I'm learning in this lifetime, it's just that. It's like I'm just learning to embrace change.
Yeah, I don't know what the poem is called, but "The Moment of Change" is the only poem. I would go look at it because it unfolds on a bunch of really sort of, to me, mind-blowing levels about how she just keeps going like one level deeper, into like, this is the poem, but wait, no, that's the poem. No, not that, And it's sort of like when you start looking at, like, I know you think about this stuff a lot, like the nature of self. You just keep going down another level and the bottom keeps falling out. And this poem kind of does that. And so it was kind of amazing. So
I just wrote down the line. I'm going to look it up after we finish our chat.
I want to stay here for just a moment longer, though, because I think that this, not being flexible and insisting on things being our way is like, that's a problem, right? I also know that I'm guilty of the other side of it, which is that I go, you know what? I guess I guess that I'm not going to get that from them. And so I'm not going to say anything again. Why bring it up again? And I end up sort of, faux accepting.
Yeah.
I end up sort of accepting on the outside, and yet inside there's still a little bit of churning going on. And I think I know for myself how to figure that out. But how do you think about that?
I think that's a great point. And it's such an everyday point where, you may have requests of your partner, but they're not able to meet them. And you feel that sense of, a small bit of agitation that you're not getting what you want. And I think what really helps is having your sort of own internal measuring system of, like, let's say you've been traveling too much, and I let my wife know that, oh, I feel like my parents have been going through a hard time. It's really important to me to go visit my parents, and would be more than happy if you come with me, but you don't have to. But as long as I have your support to like go and be with them, and just and that's one example. Just like, but you're letting an individual know when something is really important to you,
Hmm.
and when you're
Yeah.
really asking for their support, and letting the other sort of smaller things, like, because a lot of times, like, do I really need to argue about this? Like, do I really need to fight about this? Like, is this important to me? Like,
Yep.
usually no. Like, usually I can
Yep.
just let it go. And but then there are other times where like something feels really critical, and you have to just express it, vocalize, like communicate
Yep.
about it, so that you're on the same page.
Yeah. I think what I figured out for myself is if I'm in a position where I'm like, okay, I think I need to go accept this, and I go do the work of trying to accept it, and yet I can't, I don't,
Yeah.
right? Like it keeps sort of churning inside me. Okay,
Yep.
that's a sign that this is something that we're going to, it may not be an easy conversation, but we're going to have to find a way to be able to talk about this, because as much as I want to just let this go, I don't seem to be completely able to. And sometimes that's our own work to do. But there are other times where I think it's not our work, where I think we can go, you know what, this thing is, for whatever reason, for my makeup, this thing is genuinely really kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And, and again, for me, that usually comes after, like, I will try to accept too hard. Like, I mean, that's my nature. Like, I'm going to go off and try and figure this out myself, because I don't want to put my stuff on anybody else.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a big value of mine. But eventually I might go, well, you know what? Like, I'm in relationship. Like, that's part of being in a relationship.
Totally. And you know what's interesting? And building off of what you're saying, it's reminding me of something that I've been seeing sort of evolving in my relationship now, where there are times where there's some agitation that lingers, and because there are so many situations that pop up that are not just like between the two of you, but how the two of you handle other situations that arise, that are problems that the two of you need to solve together. And, it could be like a family member getting sick, or, something happens. And there are times where I found myself, letting my wife know, like, oh, I'm still agitated about one of these decisions that we made. I don't have an answer, but can we talk about it more? Like,
Yeah.
I don't really know what we should do, but let's just talk about it more. And in the process of like both of us sharing the way that we feel, where it's not combative, it's just like, let's just keep, like there's something here. It's quite nice, because even if the decision doesn't change, there's still a greater opportunity to for both of us to feel seen.
Yeah. I go back to something you said earlier that I wanted to touch on, and we just kind of moved on from, but I thought was very well said, which was this idea of the same problems sometimes are there, but our level of emotional turmoil over them is lessened. Meaning, like, we keep coming sort of back to this same thing, because it seems to be an area that we do have some degree of an incompatibility, or some sort of thing that it doesn't line up, but it's far less important than it used to be. So it's not gone. And I often think about that, like being a version of that, of like the metaphor of like a spiral staircase in growth.
Yeah.
Like if you imagine like going up a spiral staircase and there's a picture on the wall, like you keep coming back around to that picture, but ideally the next time around you see the picture from a slightly different angle. You're a little higher up and a little higher up.
Yeah, you're really making me think too. Like my wife and I have this very simple like argument that, pops up every now and then. And it's like we're so different in our character, where I'm very touch oriented. Like I need hugs from her. I need, kisses, or even just like having like my arm on her leg, or, just like some sort of touch. And she's much less so. She's very sort of like action oriented, will care for you through activities and through, I don't know, moving things forward. And we joke, like I joke with her and I'm like, "Oh, I'm touch sensitive." Like if you don't touch me, I get sensitive. And it's a common thing, but I think when the argument comes up, it just doesn't come up with that same intensity of, feeling uncared for or feeling unloved because I've learned more about her.
Yeah.
I've learned that, like, oh, actually, it's not that she doesn't care for me. It's just that she has particular ways that her conditioning shows care,
Hmm.
and we're trying to meet each other in the middle. Where I'm trying to work on receiving the way that she
Yep.
likes to care for me because it's valuable, and like I'm also learning from that and learning how to care in that way too, and she's doing vice versa, like, understanding the way I like to be cared for too. But it just feels like such a learning moment, and the tension, the valve of tension is released because having spent all those years together, I just see more about her. Like I've
Hmm.
had more time to understand where she's coming from.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and I like what you said there about you're trying to meet in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Because in the book you do talk about like it's really helpful to state how you like to be cared for, and it's ideal as a partner to try and care for the person in the way they want to
Hmm.
be. And as we've said, like, you can't always get things exactly the way you want. So you and your wife are trying to sort of meet, she's trying to say, yes, I recognize that's important to you. I'll try and think to do that. But you know what? It's not my natural way of doing things. So I may need reminded. And
Totally.
you're going, it's okay not to be that way. I see your perspective, and it's that meeting in the middle that I think is often
Totally.
so
Like,
important.
and it's so funny how, like, the little things where, you know, like a hug to me is just as valuable as like me taking care of the compost for her. Like
Hmm.
that is to her, it's like, oh my gosh, like he's really like, it's just, he's really showing up for me right
Yeah.
now. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, I'm teaching myself that and trying to show up the way like she likes that care.
Yeah, it's interesting. Speaking of labels, there was that book that, got so much attention, Five Love Languages, where it talked
Hmm.
about like, each person has like a certain love language. And
Totally.
I found that that's illuminating in that we feel cared for in different ways, and a little overly simplistic because actually I think,
Very, yeah.
right, we all have some varying degree of many of those things, and they often shift over time. And so let's talk about comparison.
Mm.
And you talk about how, comparing our relationship to other people's relationships can be very problematic. And you mentioned, one of the key ways this happens today is social media.
Mm.
And I'm curious about, broadly speaking, how you feel about social media, because it's been, I would say, largely, right, like what sort of launched your career and
Hmm.
sustains your career. So there's clearly some good things about it, and there's clearly lots of difficult things about it. When it comes to talking with other people about how they might engage with social media, how do you think about it?
It's really, it's a like and dislike relationship. I think there are so many adverse effects of social media where, if you were just to not bring any analysis to it and you were examining your own relationship, by looking, you would think, okay, how much I love my partner is dependent on how many vacations we take together, but like it's just full of illusion. And honestly, my recent approach is like, obviously, I still post on Instagram and I keep that going and I keep trying to put up good material on there. But I've been leaning on the longer format, like going back to the essay format, doubling down on the newsletter as like a means of deeper communication. And I find that, you know, I think it's really interesting. Like my guess, if I were to make a real bet about what's going to happen with social media, is I think that there's always going to be a place for it, but because of the advent of AI, it's making things so fake and
Hmm.
so untrustable. Like I'll literally, like, I'll go online and I'll see videos and whatnot, and I'm just like, I don't even know if that's real.
I,
Like
I, it,
I don't know if it's real.
Yep.
So it's totally losing my trust.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? I'm hoping that this puts a new premium on human to human interaction, where we're
Yep.
like going out to hang out with friends more often, where we're going out to see plays, or we're going out to like book readings, where I can literally see that what you're putting forward is real.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think social media will have its place because it's important for us to be connected with each other, but I think it's losing everybody's trust.
Yeah. Particularly if you have some sense of what AI is capable of, you're a little bit like terrified by it.
Yeah, and
Like
even from 6 months ago, it's like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
so much better now.
But like all the cute animal videos that I would see of animals doing something incredible, and now I'm like, I don't even know if that's real. Like, is that dog really on the surfboard? Does that dog really love that duck? It's
Yeah.
taken all the fun out of it for me.
Even with the news, like I've seen things like this on TikTok and Instagram where like they'll set up situations where it literally looks like a real reporter, and it's not real. It's
Yeah.
not real news, and it's so hard to just know like what you can trust.
Yeah, I was talking with Deepak Chopra recently, and he's created digital Deepak. Like you can go out and I was like, you know what? We are 6 months away from probably, with just a little bit of effort, digital Eric being able to interview digital Deepak,
Yeah.
and it largely being impossible to tell.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's really,
I know.
I don't know I don't know what to do as a person who creates content sort of for a living, what you do with that.
And it seems initially like a clever idea, but I think what we're going to learn from that is that what it just produces is repetition and stagnation, right?
Hmm.
Because how creative can it really get? And can it,
Yes.
like you're losing the magic of life. Like you're losing the magic of you and I, like we're literally just rapping together. We're just like,
Yep.
we're building, bouncing off each other. Like
Yep.
I had no idea where this conversation was going to go. And I know that, AI podcasts can do something similar, but because of our imperfections, because of our conditioning interacting in this moment, there's some beauty to that you can't really replicate. And I wonder about like we were just talking about this too in with different meditation teachers in the tradition I'm a part of, where some teachers are going to try to keep themselves alive forever, and like
Mm.
where they're just like all the teachings are encoded. And I've heard about this from many different traditions now, but you're losing the magic of teacher to student
Yeah.
transmission, where it's like you have a student in front of you and they're asking you a question, and you're almost looking past the question to see where is the real block. Like an
Yes.
AI is not going to be able to do that. It's just going to regurgitate.
Before we wrap up, I want you to think about this. Have you ever ended the day feeling like your choices didn't quite match the person you wanted to be? Maybe it was autopilot mode or self-doubt that made it harder to stick to your goals. And that's exactly why I created the 6 Saboteurs of Self-Control. It's a free guide to help you recognize the hidden patterns that hold you back and give you simple, effective strategies to break through them. If you're ready to take back control and start making lasting changes, download your copy now at oneyoufeed.net/ebook. Let's make those shifts happen starting today. oneyoufeed.net/ebook. Yeah. Yeah, I do think it is. And that the thing that today I feel like, or let me start that over. I think it's very interesting because there are studies out there that have shown things that are kind of, again, for those of us, I think, that are arguing on the human side, that start to become concerning. Like, people will rate an AI therapist as a better therapist than a human therapist very often. Until they know that it's an AI therapist, of course, at which point they're like, hell no.
They're creeped out. Yeah.
But I'm not sure that people that are 10 years younger than you are going to feel that same way. And
No.
so,
Yeah.
I think it's a fascinating sort of both fascinating and interesting and terrifying time, I think,
Yeah, and you can look at it from different perspectives where like maybe because the AI therapist has this wide knowledge base and because it's not a real human being, you can feel like you can really just say exactly how you feel without
Mhm.
being judged. And I can see some people, putting a high value on that. But at the same time, I think w- the human condition requires a wide variety of tools for human beings
Mhm.
to feel like they're flourishing, for human beings to feel like, we're growing and evolving and overcoming our past hurts. So, in one way, I'm glad. I'm glad that there's a variety of tools that can meet people where they're at. But at the same time, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years, everything's going to drastically, drastically change.
Yep.
And what I'm hoping for is that the same way when like the iPhone popped up and we all became these digital human beings, I think with AI, like AI is going to support us in being healthier, being more connected and whatnot, but it's just going to like push us back outside
I,
because everything is too fake.
that's the hope. That's
Yeah.
certainly my hope. Well, I think that is a great place for us to end. You and I are going to continue in the post-show conversation. I want to talk a little bit about the art of arguing, and I also want to. We started to talk about comparison a little bit, but I really do want to talk about how do I know, like, is my relationship good enough? Am I comparing it to something that's unrealistic? The nuance that we get into there. But before we wrap up completely, if you wanted people to take away sort of like one key idea about love, what might it be?
I think the key idea, sorry, the key idea that I want people to walk away with is that love is not constant excitement. It's not perfection. It's not going to take all your problems away. If anything, it's going to make you see more of yourself, and that's going to be challenging at times. But a challenge appearing doesn't mean that you're necessarily in an unhealthy relationship. If anything, ups and downs are absolutely natural in a relationship. And when the downs appear, there's usually opportunities to develop deeper connection with each other. It's a block making itself very clear so that the two of you can undo it so you can understand each other better.
That is a beautiful place to wrap up. Diego, thank you. I always enjoy talking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. This was really fun.
If what you just heard was helpful to you, please consider making a monthly donation to support the One You Feed podcast. When you join our membership community with this monthly pledge, you get lots of exclusive members-only benefits. It's our way of saying thank you for your support. Now, we are so grateful for the members of our community. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without their support, and we don't take a single dollar for granted. To learn more, make a donation at any level, and become a member of the One You Feed community, go to oneyoufeed.net/join. The One You Feed podcast would like to sincerely thank our sponsors for supporting the show.